as necessary from English to Arabic and from Arabic to English. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed participants, welcome to the second and final day of the Transatlantic Council Third Annual Conference on Sustainable Security. Today we will explore two pivotal themes that will shape the future of our planet: the green economy and the energy transition. Our goal is to gain a pragmatic understanding of how these elements can stimulate economic growth while simultaneously reducing environmental impact. Our panel of experts today are poised to support us with this goal. Thank you for your commitment to the cause of sustainability, and let's make today a day of profound impact. On that note, I would like to welcome Ann Witowski, Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, United States Department of State, to deliver the keynote address. Welcome, Ms. Ann.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Hello? Yes? Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here at Trends, here with you all today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have a chance to make a few remarks about the U.S. government's approach to climate and fragility at that intersection. I want to thank the Atlantic Council and Jonathan Hadikoff and others, for the invitation. This COP, the intersection of relief, recovery, peace, and climate change, have taken center stage for the first time at a global climate conference. The resounding message is unmistakable. For us, there is a widespread recognition that the climate crisis necessitates a paradigm shift demanding the integration of climate action and conflict prevention and stabilization strategies. Just given one example, the unprecedented drought in the Horn of Africa has killed more than 1.5 million livestock, drastically cut cereal production, and left millions at risk of severe food insecurity. The return of powerful rains, while welcome relief from the drought, has created severe floods and again threatened communities in places like Kenya and Somalia. According to a recent report by Action Against Hunger, nearly 1.6 million people throughout the Horn of Africa have been displaced by severe climate-induced floods this year. Here at COP28, I represented the United States at a high-level event on climate, peace, and security in the Horn of Africa, hosted by the UN Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa. The experiences shared by ministers representing the Horn of Africa, has made it clear how these communities experiencing conflict and political violence are also at the forefront of the most devastating impacts of the climate crisis. We also know that less than 10% of climate finance reaches the local level. I think you're going to talk a little bit more about that later today. And even less reaches areas experiencing conflict or instability. So yes, this thematic elevation matters here, and it will matter even more so after we leave this conference as we forge ahead to implement our commitments. These will require, for example, that we expand our partnerships, do even more to fortify local capacities, and confront climate-induced insecurity with better data for evidence-driven decision-making. The COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery, and Peace challenges us to coordinate across the climate, development, peace-building, international finance, and humanitarian communities to deliver coherent, inclusive programs and climate solutions in regions of need of this investment. This speaks to the critical work that the Bureau I lead, the Conflict and Stabilization Operations Bureau, or CSO, is doing with our interagency partners on climate. At CSO, for example, we are integrating climate into the implementation of the Global Fragility Act of 2019, an important law that mandates new approaches to addressing instability and fragility, and the associated U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. We are doing this by collaborating with those leading the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or PREPARE, an initiative of the U.S. government to support more than 500 million people to adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change by 2030 in the priority countries and region under the U.S. strategy that I just mentioned. We have begun to align our work streams where appropriate throughout the State Department as well as with our science agency partners and the U.S. Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate and the National Security Council. More broadly, we're working with our partners and our allies to exchange lessons learned as other governments advance similar types of coordination. Now, as a longtime national security professional, an advocate for the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, and noting yesterday's gender theme and key announcements around gender, I would be remiss if I did not also address gender in this context today as a critical cross-cutting issue to this climate and fragility challenge. Addressing gender within the context of this challenge is not just a moral imperative, it is a strategic imperative, and not only at leadership levels. Women at the grassroots level are indispensable contributors to sustainable resource management, climate resilience, and peace building. The inclusion of women is key to sustaining peace more effectively in the face of climate shocks and stressors. There is significant opportunity for the peace building and stabilization community to better interweave climate with the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, combining the imperatives of taking climate action interwoven with our approaches to stabilization, conflict prevention, and gender. This is something that we are striving to accomplish in the CSO Bureau through the U.S. Strategy to Prevent Conflict and Promote Stability. The conflict and stabilization community in the U.S. government is ready to contribute our expertise and our experience in many ways to the challenges that the climate action community is examining and looking to advance, including one very important area that we've had an opportunity to discuss in various different ways in this conference in the last few days, and that's in designing, monitoring, evaluation, and learning metrics. How do we know? How do we know if we're making progress? How do we know? Our community also understands the requirements of taking conflict-sensitive approaches and bringing those to the climate action arena. We have lessons learned and best practices to better inform how climate work can be implemented effectively in areas experiencing fragility or instability. From the perspective of the U.S. conflict and stabilization community, we recognize that the challenge of climate change requires more than a government-centric solution. Just as we're here at COP, we're recognizing it demands a whole of society approach, engaging with local actors, civil society, academics, non-governmental organizations, and highly regarded experts in the field at esteemed institutions like the Atlantic Council. Our solutions together must be multifaceted, integrating both top-down and bottom-up perspectives. Political will and senior leadership are pivotal, yet equally essential are field-driven and locally led solutions by those on the front lines in local communities. This year's COP RRP theme has challenged us all to collectively face the climate crisis together, across disciplines, with our respective tools, expertise, and a commitment together to forging a resilient and sustainable future. We look forward to the continued collaboration and progress on this critical issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anne. Esteemed audience, we're now ready to start the first session of the day. It is titled Green Economy and the Future of Climate Financing. Please help me welcome our experts. Ariel Azrahi, Non-Resident Senior Fellow with the Atlantic Council's Middle East Programs, Director of Climate Strategy at New Vest. Stephen Scalit, Scientific Advisor at Trends Research and Advisory. May El Hajri, Strategic Partnerships Officer at Abu Dhabi Investment Office and former youth delegate to the UN, and our moderator, Moza Al Marzouki, Trends Research and Advisory. Please welcome.
I'll go to the other side.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome everyone to our fourth session titled Green Economy and the Future of Climate Financing. My name is Moza Marzougi and I'll be the moderator today for this session. With fossil fuels as more profitable than green alternatives for now, concentrated intervention is needed to bridge the climate finance gap and reach economies of scale. It is with great honor to present our first speaker for today, Ariel Ezrahi, the non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council Middle East Programs. You can go ahead, Ariel.
Shukran jazilan. And it's very nice to be here with friends at Trends and with my colleagues at the Atlantic Council and also my one colleague here from Nuvest as well. So thank you very much for making this possible and for giving me the opportunity. How many minutes do I have?
7 to 10.
7 to 10.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, it's wonderful to be here on Energy Day. It's a very important topic to be discussing. The challenges we have are absolutely formidable. We've heard estimates, I don't think anybody knows exactly, but we have heard estimates of between 3.5 to 4 trillion dollars annually that's needed for us to reach net zero by 2050. That's a gargantuan amount of money that's needed. And putting it in more immediate terms, by 2030 alone, we need to raise more than 3 times the capital that we have invested today. And I hope you'll correct me because I know you're the economist from getting any of these figures wrong.
Thank you.
And we know also that a vast majority of this finance will absolutely need to come from private sources of capital. And I'm also very happy today on energy to announce that in my other hat, my Nuvest hat, that we're launching GET28 at COP28. So hopefully this is a worthwhile news item. And this is basically the world's first investable index of energy transition private funds. And the whole concept, what I've seen for years is that, when I worked on energy transition issues, is that we absolutely need to be able to also mobilize the finance. We can't just work on these issues. I mean, there's innovators doing the innovation, but if they don't have the funding that's needed to support and incentivize these innovations, and we'll get nowhere. The UAE has taken a leadership position in this, and this is one reason why we decided at Nuvest to house this product that we're launching in ADGM, because we see that the UAE can be a very important gateway for mobilizing finance, not just for the not just for projects in the UAE, but for private companies globally. And we know that it's a global problem. It's not a local problem. We feel it very badly in the Middle East, climate change, but this is really a global problem that we have to work on together. We hear often, and it was mentioned also by Assistant Secretary Witkowski, the concept of a just transition, and that is also very important because we're not born equal, and we're also not, we don't have all the same resources around the planet, and therefore I very much welcome also the announcements that we've heard in the last few days by the COP28 presidency here in the UAE, the $57 billion already raised so far at this COP, and also very excited to hear about the 1 trillion Emirati dirhams committed towards the energy transition. So I think we really all need to work together. This is work that we at the Atlantic Council care a lot about, and also the financial sector has a very important role, and just very happy to be here with Trends because you're writing very important research on these issues, and hope to continue the collaboration in the future. Was I within the 7 to 10 minutes?
Yes, you were.
Okay, great.
And we're more than happy to have you with us, Ariel. So what do you think are the most pressing challenges that policymakers need to address in order to create an environment that is conducive to green finance, and how can these challenges be overcome?
I think that's a great question, and it's a difficult question. I was hoping you'd ask an easy question, but that's actually a very difficult question. I think we have several challenges. First of all, how do we define energy transition? We don't have across the planet consensus on what is energy transition. Some folks feel that natural gas, for example, cannot be, or nuclear should not be part of the transition. We don't believe that that's the case, and the fund that we're launching includes in the energy transition definition nuclear and natural gas technologies such as carbon capture and others, because we can't go from here to there without having a transition, and that's why it's called the energy transition. But in different parts of the planet and different players, not everybody is in agreement on that. That's why I think also it was very, very important that Dr. Sultan Jaber, the COP28 president, made a point of bringing together all the players around the table, including the oil and gas companies. And we've seen already the pledge. I think we have 60% of the national oil companies have already pledged, and I hope that there'll be more and more that will come to the fore, because if we can agree with ourselves, but we need to be able to sit around the table, the oil producers, and I think that's one reason also why this COP28 is very, very important, that it's being held here in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, sorry.
Dubai.
Yeah, in the UAE.
Yeah. Thank you, Ariel, for your response. We'll be moving to Stephen now. So Stephen Scarlett is the scientific advisor at Trans Research and Advisory, and he'll be talking about the supply chains in the new climate economy, decarbonization, and the resilience challenge. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you, Moza. Delighted to be here today, and especially delighted to see such a big crowd in this conference room on the second day. Supply chains in the new climate economy, resilience and decarbonization. So we have four concepts which individually are quite simple, but together interact in very complicated ways. The new economy, Vice President Kamala Harris, I think on the 2nd of December, when she announced a $3 billion climate fund or something like that, couldn't omit to mention that the biggest investment in the history of the US and maybe the history of the world, climate investment that is, of $10 trillion over 10 years, was made by her administration. And she specifically said that the investment will be to build factories, manufacturing facilities in wind turbines, in electric vehicles, batteries, solar power panels. So the concept is manufacturing industrial leadership. So that, to me, is as good a definition as any of the climate, or at least the size of the new climate economy. In terms of decarbonization, it's also worth defining that term. And again, we go for an expansive definition of decarbonization. It isn't just removing carbon from the atmosphere through substituting renewables for fossil fuel generation in the power sector. This is the beginning. This happened years and years ago. The vector is good, momentum is good, it's all going all right. Could be better, of course. But when we say decarbonization, we mean the broad electrification of the entire economy. So that means the transport sector, personal mobility, of course, cars, scooters, mass mobility. We mean decarbonized in the future aviation sectors, shipping sectors, industrial sectors with hydrogen as a potential replacement for heat in industrial processes instead of gas, instead of fuels. So that's what we mean. In addition, of course, to the digital infrastructure that will be necessary to support the entire new climate economy. So there we have a materials implication again, because it's about displays, semiconductors, it's about next generation communication, and all the high-tech applications which are mineral intensive, which will be necessary to support the new economy. So you can immediately see that the concepts are very, very broad, and that breadth is significant because it isn't only a question of decarbonization of emissions. It also becomes a question of what are the future industries going to be. And there's a reason that the Biden administration is investing $10 trillion. And there's a reason that the Europeans with the Green Deal are similarly trying to boost investment through their own private sectors. The Japanese and South Korea, they're all doing more or less the same thing to incentivize their private sectors to take the lead in the industries of the future and the climate economy of the future. So this is significant because on the one hand, we have a global agenda of decarbonization. You know, we all breathe the same atmosphere. We are all, you know, subject to global warming or heating or climate crisis or, you know, whatever the current definition is. But at the same time, there's a tension. There's a divergence with the interests at the national level, which are very understandable because all superpowers do this. They want leadership, they want industrial leadership in particular sectors for economic reasons. So there's a tension there. Now coming to supply chains, you can see that from the complexity of the new climate economy and from its breadth, you can see that there will be a necessity for a highly complex network of international supply chains. We can, you know, many thousands of, hundreds of thousands of supply chains, but to focus on the most critical ones in the context of the energy transition, those are critical mineral supply chains. So the energy transition, metals and minerals, which we all know what they are: copper, cobalt, lithium, nickel, zinc, graphite, silicon, so on and on. So these are the metals which have a special application to, we can say, new energy, forms of new energy, and the broader climate economy. There's a subset of other minerals which are called rare earth elements, 17 with names that are almost impossible to pronounce. The same dynamics broadly apply to that subset of rare earth minerals. Now, when we contrast the complexity of those supply chains with the traditional fossil fuel supply chains, which are very, very simple, traditionally, what still happens now, will happen for decades. A cargo ship leaves a port, a super tanker or an LNG carrier. It arrives at its destination, and from there the fossil fuel goes into a refinery or a gas plant, and within 2 or 3 days you have your fuels. It's pretty simple to manage. Economically, it's about price mostly. Limited geopolitics. Geopolitically, sometimes supply shuts off and you have a problem, and then there's a price spike and we're all unhappy. But that normally gets solved quickly. Whereas with critical minerals, it's much, much, much more complex. And so the issue is a geographic one and a technical one. There's a concentration of these minerals in certain countries around the world. This is the case for not all of them, but certainly for several of the critical ones. That concentration is in certain mining countries. In China, there's one, South America, Peru, Chile, and so on. It's very much a technical issue, but naturally, if we consider the necessity of those minerals, those supply chains, it's also a global issue. So resilience becomes very important. Now, yesterday, Professor Shihabuddin, in his excellent keynote address, mentioned that energy has always been about security of supply. It's been like that for the last 30 or 40 years. And I could add that in minerals, and in almost all cases of resilience today, the last 3 or 4 years and the supply shocks have made policymakers and businesses very, very sensitive to the threat of supply risk. There is an incredible policy response to try to forestall and mitigate problems of concentration of supply. Now, looking forward, which is what think tanks such as ourselves and the Atlantic Council like to do, we love to examine the external environment and see what the dynamics are and then make an assessment of the future. Looking forward, we see quite a dark picture in the sense that there is a trend of global deglobalization, is one way of describing it, of fragmentation is another way of describing it, where we see separate economic and political blocks in the future. So that's one trend. The other trend has been mentioned several times: great power competition. So those are the two trends, the two broad dynamics within which international supply chains of the future will be developed. Coming to the key question of whether it's possible to have a supply chain which will be economically efficient, which means relatively cheap. It will also contribute to global decarbonization. And it will also be resilient. We can immediately see that it will be very hard to have all three of those. You can have resilience, but you're going to pay a lot. You can have a supply chain which contributes to your national industrial interests, but it will not contribute to global decarbonization. So that's going to be very, very difficult to see. We believe that a business as usual scenario in which supply chains are determined according to low prices are unlikely to continue, given these trends of deglobalization and increasing great power competition. For a country to develop an autonomous supply chain, thinking about scenarios, would depend on whether the country has the resources and the technology to do so. It may, outside of the very big countries, China, Russia, the United States, highly unlikely. So the answer perhaps lies in strategic partnerships. And Aaron Sikorsky mentioned this yesterday in a general sense, that even in the context of global competition, there can and must be space for alliances and strategic partnerships. The G7 have recently expanded their minerals security partnership, involving Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Australia. There are talks of extending that partnership to other countries in the developing world, which I think is very, very good news indeed. Another potential solution will be to increase recycling, which is nascent. I think it doesn't happen much in terms of batteries. It's around 2-3% recovery, and the forecasts are to expand that to 10% of total demand for some elements. And of course, technology and innovation are always a wild card or a trump card, in the sense that a technological substitution of one rare earth element or mineral for another is a constant focus of research, and it can happen, and it will change the entire dynamics. So to conclude, we see a future in which global competition for critical minerals and rare earth elements is very marked, but we would also encourage all efforts to conclude broad strategic partnerships, not only among developed countries, but also with countries in the global south, who for the time being are mostly involved in the extraction part of the minerals business. So it would be very beneficial and economically and geopolitically healthy to give those countries a stake also in the processing and production part of the minerals supply chain, and that would undoubtedly also improve the global picture as regards the geopolitics. So thank you for your time, and I hope that I've stayed within 10 minutes at least.
Almost. Thank you, Stephen. So you mentioned the challenges and opportunities of the future industries. How do you think that looks like for the private sector and private companies in general?
Well, Ariel got a difficult question, but I got a very easy question. So when we appreciate the size of the energy transition and what is really going to be required for decarbonization, just in terms of power, let alone the rest of the economy, we can really, if we're realistic, we would acknowledge that only the private sector has the resources and also the technology leadership to drive that change. So I would say that it's critically important to evolve instruments and approaches, and also a mentality whereby the private sector would outright lead the energy transition. The job of government is to facilitate it, to incentivize it, facilitate it through the incentives that we've discussed so far. But it's got to be the private sector, which is why Ariel's excellent work for the index provides a global basis to invest. And that's a great thing. It's been lacking so far.
Thank you, Stephen. And last but not least, we have with us May Al-Hajri, Strategic Partnership Officer at the Abu Dhabi Investment Office and the former youth delegate to the UN. May, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Moza. First and foremost, it's an absolute pleasure again to join the discussion with my dear colleague Stephen. Also, it's a great honor to be speaking alongside Ariel from the Atlantic Council as Assistant Secretary, and have said I think it's very crucial to have women in such spaces. Nevertheless, when it comes to subspaces that discusses energy transition and financing as well. Also, I am very thrilled to be also chosen as one of the youngest speakers, I would assume, in this gathering, which again, if it sends a message, that youth has to be the center of such discussions, because when we talk about the future, we talk about young people driving that change to the sustainable and resilient future that we hope to have. I think really when we talk about green investment here, it's a discussion that has been on and on and on, almost in every kind of discussion, negotiations of the COP28 presidency. And if anything, it really sends the message that it does not only matter, but again, it's really a big part, or a really huge and influential component of the future that we are here today trying to reimagine and reconstruct. And again, the reason why I am shedding the light on these kind of topics is not to only reiterate the climate financing or a green investment topic matters, because I think our presence here today really confirms that, but rather I really want to shed the light here today on the opportunities that this field opens. So what do I mean by opportunities, and where these opportunities come from? So as someone who's been really heavily invested in the business world, I think my definition of an opportunity comes from a challenge, like any kind of business. So when we talk about decarbonization, it's really, we have too much CO2 emission floating around our globe, how we can make, how we can come with successful, impactful business models that can capture CEOs as well as grant us the economic growth that we wish for. So an opportunity stems from a challenge or an obstacle. Let me maybe shed the light a bit, if you'll allow me, on my country, the UAE, since we are here today and we are the hostess of COP28. So when we won the bid to host COP28, it wasn't really perceived well, maybe because we are considered amongst the top 10 oil-producing countries. As one of my mentors said, which by the way, it was very coincidental, it happened last week, and I was so, I said, you know what, Budim, I'm gonna use that quote whether you like it or not, and I'm gonna share it with my guests or my audience next week. He said, we didn't ask for oil. We were blessed with oil by God. However, we chose to invest in renewables. And I think it really came in a perfect timing, not only because we're speaking today in the energy and industries kind of theme at COP, but also because really to many, when we talk about the perception of the UAE, especially those critics who have been bashing the UAE for winning the bid of COP28, I think their perception of the UAE is purely limited to the narrative that's closely related to oil and gas. And I think that might be true if we're talking about the UAE in the past 15 to 20 years. But even in that narrative, I think our founding father, Sheikh Zayed, have always cared about the environment and always cared about the nature, not only as a part of our planet, but also as a part of our culture. So really, when we talk about the UAE's present, I would like to define it as a ambitious, diverse, and futuristic in all its aspects, especially in the energy and industrial sector. Let me maybe talk to you or walk you through the UAE's present only if we consider the past week or so. And the gentlemen here have brought great examples about the UAE's devotion to just energy transition or climate financing or really advancing the sustainable development goals. So as Ariel have mentioned, the UAE have pledged over 57 billion US dollars in numerous initiatives to advance the global response to climate action. Out of the 75 billion US dollars, 2.5 billion was mobilized for renewables, 1.2 billion were devoted for methane emissions reductions, as well as roughly $570 million was pledged to drive investment in clean energy and manufacturing. Also, maybe on a local, this is on a global scale, I would say, maybe on more of a local, on the local efforts that's being done, especially myself being a member of the Abu Dhabi Investment Office. It's also fair to share that there has been tremendous work that we've been doing in the office to hunt for the most innovative, most emerging technologies out there to support our vision to become a global leader in the field of technology and energy efficiency. I don't know if you follow if you are aware of Abu Dhabi Investment Office, but if not, please, this is an invitation for you to follow our social media pages. We have launched our first cluster, Savvy, which highlights smart and autonomous vehicles industry on the land, air, and sea element. We've coupled up or we established partnerships with great companies from all around the world that really are not only keen about being innovative, but also driving impact in their respective industries. Again, there's so many exciting opportunities that are within the horizon, so I urge you all to keep a close contact or keep a close eye on our upcoming and future initiatives. Really, to us, the equation is very simple. It's about economic diversification as well as preserving our resources to create the sustainable economic growth that we wish to advance. But really, I think what I would like to highlight, and this is something Ariel have touched upon, is that the element of partnerships. Today, I think every developing country have the opportunity to advance that agenda by itself. But we choose not to do it by ourselves because I believe the UAE is a country that thrives under collaborative environment. We are aware of of really the fruits of what joint efforts could yield, rewarding into more beneficial outcomes than the one that could be done independently. Also, not to mention what we can unlock when we advance that agenda and wage the gap between us and the global South. I believe all of us have seen the announcement of the 30 billion fund that the UAE have established in collaboration with BlackRock, Brookfield, and TPG. I think really this union with the private sector, as you mentioned, Ariel, such as yourself, Stephen, really is a powerful reconstruction of what partnerships should look like, because again, the governments here have done their part. They should move from being the custodians, I would say, to more of facilitators and regulators. The private sector should take more proactive role because there's so much potential that we can unlock together, accelerating the energy transition or accelerating the other related fields. And again, to me, it's always that kind of distinguishing factor behind a very successful collaboration. And not to mention today when we talk about the UAE chairing that 30 billion fund, I think really it sends a very key message today here, which is transparency. Today, when we talk about climate fund, we're not talking about another climate fund that the COP conference or the UNCCC have came with. We are here to act. This is, I think, the biggest message that the COP28 presidency and team wants to deliver to the rest of the world and to its partners, that we are here to act. We act with transparency, we act with drive, we act with ambition, and it's an invitation for all to take a part of it. And again, as any kind of business model, we talk about the benefits. What is it for me? When we really talk about initiatives such as the above, there will be a huge influx and demand of labor and skills. This is where a lot of jobs will be created. If I to talk about the Savvy cluster alone, we will be dedicating 5,000 jobs in the upcoming 2 years alone, which really tells you about the potential. So how will it be in terms of the Altera Fund or the different kind of pledges the UAE and the rest of our partners have committed in the past week or so. That being said, I think we subsequently the quality of life will be improved, not only to granting potentially the economic growth that we wish to have. In conclusion, really, it's not going to be an easy change, because ultimately what we are seeking here, we are seeking a change of mindset, and we are talking about a very persistent mindset that have been long embedded by beliefs that were transmitted from a generation to a generation. So it's really not an easy job, but let me tell you, it will be a rewarding job, because today's present is filled with very ambitious youth, such as myself, I would say, that are very keen about the environment, that are very keen about the collective joint efforts to build a brighter, resilient, fulfilling future for today's people and the future generations to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, May, for your insightful talk. So I would like to open the floor now for the audience. For any questions to the speakers, please let us know. Anyone?
Don't be shy. There is no such thing as a silly question or a bad question.
We covered everything.
Yeah, I think the speakers today covered all grounds by that take. I would like to thank all of our speakers today for this insightful and very enriching session. And please, round of applause for everyone. Just an announcement for the audience. We'll have the coffee break now until the 5th session of today. Thank you.
As usual, that was amazing. Spontaneous ovation. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to the final session of the Trends and Atlantic Council Third Annual Conference on Sustainable Security. The title of this closing session is titled The Energy Transition and Net Zero. Please welcome our panelists. Iris Ferguson, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Arctic and Global Resilience, United States. Dr. Ravi Chaudhary, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Energy Installations and Environment. Faisal Ali Rashid, PMP, Senior Director, Demand Side Management, the Dubai Supreme Council of Energy. Chairman, Advancing Net Zero Volunteering Team. And our moderator, Dr. Waddah Ghanem Al-Hashmi, Honorary Chairman of the Energy Institute, Middle East. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us in this event on the energy transition and net zero. And I want to give another warm welcome to our panelists. My name is Dr. Waddah Ghanem Al-Hashmi. I'm the honorary chairman for the Energy Institute here in the Middle East, and I, besides other things, also work for the Emirates. Is the voice? Work for the Emirates National Oil Company. So today we're going to be addressing this whole issue of net zero and the energy transition. Obviously, a very important aspect. And very interestingly, you know, when we come and talk about, you know, this whole thing about the energy transition, you know, my personal views, just to start with, is a lot of people talk about the energy transition, but at the same time, it's more like many organizations and people think it's like some sort of energy revolution, and I think it's a question of reforming the whole energy system rather than this whole revolution against the energy system. So we need to get to net zero. We need to plan the steps to get to net zero, but at the same time, we need to do it in such a way where there is no impact. I'll give you just an example, a personal example of mine. When I was much younger, my father was preparing a PhD in South Wales in the UK, and at that time, that was in the early 80s, and at the time I was studying there, and there was this lady. Some of you who are maybe as old as I am will remember. Her name was Margaret Thatcher. She was called the Iron Woman. And Margaret Thatcher, you know, did something amazing. and she sort of made sure that there was a very good transition, very effective kind of transition, and got rid of well, in very few number of years, was able to sort of get rid of the coal industry and said, no, oil is better, oil is cleaner. And it was. I mean, oil is, believe it or not, cleaner than coal. And therefore she sort of in a few years was able to very, very effectively get rid of coal. Of course, coal industry had many, many other dependent industries, the iron and steel works, there was a lot of stuff that was happening at the ports. So there were a lot of industries and a lot of people who were working in that industry and allied industries next to the coal industry. Of course, the way that she was so effective in sort of getting rid of that. Some people say that, of course, she was against the unionization, the unions, and wanted to break the unions, and that's what there is. So there are always political reasons. It's not always, you know, it wasn't purely for environmental and love of God reasons, you know, that she did that. But anyway, what was the consequence? The consequence is I went back and I did my first degree, my environmental engineering degree, in Cardiff University. And the time I went back, it was already in the early 90s, so some 10 years on. And I went and visited places in South Wales, you know, the Rhondda Valley and places, Pontypridd and places like that in the UK. And you know, the devastation to society and the social system there in South Wales. And in that area, actually, in South Wales, place like the Rhondda Valley, today suffers from the highest unemployment and drug abuse rates and suicide rates and all kinds of, you know, social problems in the area. I mean, the highest, I think, drug abuse rate in the whole of the UK. So the thing is, you know, when we do a transition, we must understand that the transition has to, you know, have to take everyone along. And I've always believed that, you know, I believe very, very strongly that energy system has to go through a transition. The real problem is that we have to understand that, you know, we cannot just transition just like that. We have to really think about it. I was asked yesterday, and I'll end with this point, and then I'll introduce our panelists and get them to give their opening remarks. I was asked that, you know, that people are very optimistic about the changes that are happening. We're responsible for something called the UAE Energy Barometer Report, which was released yesterday by the Energy Institute. I was on a panel yesterday. One of the findings was that people in the UAE, the energy practitioners, believe that we will not only reach our targets or meet our targets in the UAE 2030, 2050, by 2030, 2050. Actually, the belief is that we are going to probably reach those targets before those dates. It's completely different to other places in the world where, you know, politicians have given commitments to 2030 and now have kicked the can down the road to 2020, 35 and stuff like that, because they've realized that it's actually economically impossible, economically impairing to try to do that, and it'll be very, very difficult to do this. So, and they asked me, so why the optimism? And I said to them, the optimism is very, very simple, because there is a serious engaged leadership who have a compelling view of this transition. Just because the UAE does rely a lot on conventionals and rely on oil and gas does not mean that it's going to just sit back and rest on that. It is actually investing that money into people, into systems, into partnerships, into collaborations to try to bring that energy transition towards net zero. So I think that that's why there is a positive belief that we are able to reach those targets. I personally am one of those people who believes that we can reach those targets as well. So with that introduction, I'll introduce one by one our panel speakers today. So we have Ms. Iris Ferguson, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Arctic and Global Resilience in the United States, and she'll be giving us an introduction on how does the U.S. security perceive the challenges and opportunities connected to the energy transition. And then after that, we'll invite Dr. Ravi Chaudhry, the Assistant Secretary for the Air Force for Energy, Installations and the Environment in the United States, how the U.S. is partnering with other entities, including other governments, the private sector and the local communities to advance and capitalize on the energy transition, particularly with regards to energy efficiency and low carbon technologies. And then finally, last but not least, a dear friend of mine who we've worked with for many, many years, Mr. Faisal Ali Rashid, the Senior Director for Demand Side Management at Dubai Supreme Council of Energy, Chairman, advancing the Net Zero volunteering team. He'll be talking to us about the clean energy transition in the private sector and the government entities and the road to Net Zero 2050. So we'll start with ladies first, then our guest from the US, and then what we'll do is I'll maybe ask a couple of questions and then open the floor to some questions. Sorry, I forgot my glasses. These are my reading glasses, but when you want to ask questions, just raise your hand. I'll try to see you. Either that or I wear my sunglasses and look cool because they've got power in them as well. So I can do that as well. So up to you guys. Okay, please.
Great, thank you, and thank you so much to the Atlantic Council for putting on this event. It's really important to have these kinds of dialogues, and it's important to have a multi-sector approach to this. The Department of Defense is a somewhat new player to COP. We had our first delegation at last year's COP, and this is our second time here. And it's really important that we continue to think about the security implications of many aspects of what's happening here, not only with the climate crisis and causing instability, but also with the energy transition. There's a whole raft of security issues that are involved with that. And so I want to just briefly say, why is DoD here? We continue to get quizzical looks like, oh, what are you doing here? What's your role? And it's really threefold. One, being a part of the whole of government approach to tackling the climate crisis. This administration, the U.S. administration, has been very clear that this is a whole of government approach, and it showcases how important the DoD is taking that. The second is that we're in the security risk business, in the strategic risk business. And what is happening with climate change is driving really tangible issues with how we're thinking about our strategic risk, our operational risk, and our tactical risk. It's impacting us across all of these three realms. And lastly, our organization is large. All of the technology companies and incredible innovation that's happening in the green zone in particular, and all the different ideas that are percolating, whether it be in cities or aircraft or energy generation or usage, those kinds of technologies are incredibly important for us to also leverage because we also have all of the things that are being worked on globally in one organization. We have huge installations, we have planes, we have ships, we have roads, we have big grid systems. We also are, by many measures, the largest employer in the world with almost 3 million people. So there are so many significant issues that we're trying to tackle for just one organization that I think we are also trying to tackle globally. And so to speak to the energy transition piece of this puzzle, it's pretty profound, quite frankly. I mean, I've been speaking to a number of different organizations, including to NATO recently and the North Atlantic Council just about a month ago on how the DoD is thinking about the energy transition because so much of this needs to be done with allies and partners across the globe. But as you were describing, sir, that the transition is going to be very complicated. Past transitions have taken place over centuries or half a century, and we're trying to create a transition that's happening in a decade or so. It's pretty profound. It's going to be bumpy. It'll be messy. It's not going to be linear, likely. But what we do know is that those governments and those militaries that do prepare to take advantage of these transitions are going to have an edge over those who do not. And so that's what we're really trying to focus on within the DoD, is ensuring that we're leveraging innovation and technology where we can. And so what are we doing? Four key things. One is in planning. We need to plan and look for risks and look for opportunities. We have incorporated these concepts into our highest strategic documents, into our national defense strategy, calling for ourselves to have greater energy efficiency and leaning into innovation meaningfully. We also have a suite of war games that we've been doing across the department in every single combatant command and also in all of the services. And that provides the level of analysis and data that we need to make some strategic decisions. In some of our most interesting war games, and I think Ravi might get into some of this in a minute, is that we're learning that fuel is a really big liability for us. Fossil fuels in particular are very heavy, they're very expensive, and they're also often a point of attack for our adversaries, but they can also be a margin of victory if we increase our efficiencies. So that brings you to my second piece, efficiency. The U.S. DoD uses about 75% of the total energy uses for the entire U.S. government. That's a pretty profound statistic. We have a large footprint. I already mentioned that we're one of the largest organizations, certainly for the U.S., but also globally. So that matches, but we also have a global footprint. So really thinking about how we're driving efficiencies across our platforms, across our installations, how we're thinking about energy usage, trying to adopt ideas from the private sector so that we can modify and detect where we need to be cutting. And then resilience is yet the third big piece of this. Climate change is driving so much instability globally, but it's also driving some pretty big impacts to our installations in particular, both in the US, but also across the globe. The amount of impacts and the amount of money we're spending in the cleanup in the aftermath of hurricanes or dramatic flooding is pretty profound. We're spending some $5 billion at Tyndall Air Force Base, and Ravi can go into a lot of detail on how we're thinking about structuring a base so that as it's going through if it's going to be hit by a hurricane again, it'll actually have the resilient capabilities that you need to withstand that kind of damage. But there's a lot of analysis happening across the board for us in thinking about which installations are the most vulnerable to climate effects and how we can build the right capacity to improve that resilience. And that includes through microgrids and ensuring that our supply of energy is sufficient and that it's protected, and that we're not necessarily reliant on a supply that is vulnerable. And then lastly, the security dynamic of this and that the fact that we need to be unbeholden to our competitors as we're going through this transition. We want to make sure that as we're transitioning to new sources of energy, new types of technology, that we're not trading one dependence over another. And so really taking a hard look at how we're adapting technology and which pieces of technology we're looking to adapt and working closely with our allies and partners, of course, in that effort, because we certainly will not be able to navigate this alone. So that's some broad picture thinking from the DoD. Pass it over to my colleague.
Well, thank you very, very much for that. And so Dr. Ravi, over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Atlantic Council, for having me here today. It is an absolute pleasure to be here to engage in some of these conversations. Thank you to the UA. We are absolutely overwhelmed by your welcome, by the partnership, by the friendship. And so I would like to extend on behalf of my government my thanks for having us here today. But let's get down to business. I will paraphrase Special Envoy John Kerry by stating this, and he said this on day one. You cannot have a conversation on global climate change unless you can have a conversation about the security implications of that phenomena. Period. So in the Department of Defense, we are, as you know, committed to global security, a more secure world. But we have to also make sure that we double down on making it a world worth securing. That means making sure that we all do our part across the government to ensure that we're contributing to the impacts of global climate change. As my colleague mentioned, Iris, that the United States Air Force, the Department of the Air Force, is one of the largest contributors to fossil fuel consumption across the government. So my challenge, once I was confirmed, was to begin innovating. How do I make my contributions to global security a better world? So we've been innovating like never before, and I came up with one motto. We are not going to move at the speed of government. We're going to move at the speed of the climate threat. And that's the bar we set in our organization to ensure that we're tracking and moving in the right direction. So let me talk a little bit about some of the innovations that we've been doing in the Department of the Air Force. I'll unveil three, but then I'll kind of riff into some other ones that are really, really important to us. And it starts with aviation. Reducing how much fuel we consume has got to be a priority in the Department of the Air Force because of the size of the fleet and the amount of fuel we consume. So we've embarked upon the design of an all-new aircraft. It is known as a blended wing body aircraft. If we have our media folks that have that picture, if you could put it up, that'd be great. You could take a quick look at it. But it's a innovation that's so extraordinary that it will reduce fuel consumption by 30%. And that's something we haven't had in a long time. It also has engines stacked on the top. If you would imagine it, it's like a flying manta ray. So it's going to make use of aerodynamic efficiencies that weren't able to achieve with a tube and wing conventional aircraft. So we'll also stack the engines on top of the aircraft to prevent noise pollution, but also pre-positioning us to make ourselves ready for the hydrogen transition. Most people think that this type of innovation that's done in the military traditionally, breaking the speed of sound, advent of jet aircraft, the advent of helicopter aircraft, was designed primarily for military applications, which we do. But the exciting thing about this is that we're going to have a 2/3 match on our investment from commercial entities, from private industry, air carriers, and other cargo haulers that deliver packages worldwide. That's the innovative piece to this, because we want to bring all sectors together, academia, industry, government together to move our progress forward. So we're moving out. We've awarded this, and we're going to design, build, and fly this aircraft by 2027. That's how the Department of the Air Force is doubling down on being part of the solution. But there's things we can start right now. We just completed testing of a new innovation that's so simple, but will yield so many gains that we couldn't not do it. It's called the small microvane. So we've made these 3D printed tabs, they're microvanes, and we aligned them on the side of the body of an aircraft called the C-17, which is a large airlifter. So by placing this on the side of the body in rows of about 10 to 15, we can get millions of gallons of savings and reduce our fossil fuel consumption. So we decided to take a look at other areas where we can reduce drag, increase efficiency, and reduce our fossil fuel footprint. Everything from winglet designs to engine nacelles that allow us to smooth out some of the jagged and direct connections in between the engine and the wing of the aircraft. We're going to get millions, on the order of millions of gallons of reductions in demand. So we've already started this. We've also looked at software development to make sure we flight plan appropriately. We also looked at how we're conducting our operations, an excellence program in which we train ourselves to reduce the amount of consumption. And we're seeing tens of millions just in how we choose to fly our aircraft in a more efficient manner. That's how we as a department are doubling down. Another innovation that we're exploring at our installations is small micro reactors. So we have an SMR here, as I understand, at UAE, and it's on the order of, as I understood, roughly 1,000 megawatts. But I'm talking about 5 megawatt, a microreactor. This will give us both the agility and the low footprint to ensure safety. We're also including the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for siting and licensing. Why? Because we want the commercial sector to derive the benefit of this technology. We want the global community to democratize how we push clean energy across our organizations. And that's really exciting. And so the third one I'll share with you, of course, we have geothermal microreactor and other initiatives that we're launching very, very quickly. But the third one is simply out of this world. We're planning to implement a space solar payload through power beaming of power from space using microwave technology to power beam it anywhere and anytime we want to across the globe. We're planning to fly the payload next year, and we want to remain on the leading edge, to harness the sun's energy in order to meet our operational requirements. Once again, the commercial applications for this are quite simply astounding. So these are just a few examples of how the Department of the Air Force, the Department of Defense, is taking action and we've published this in our climate action plan. And we followed it with a campaign plan. So you can't execute your action plan without a timeline, which is why we released a campaign plan to do it step by step. A plan of action, a strategy that's more than just talk, a commitment to making sure that not only is the world more secure, but we make it a world worth securing. So with that, I'll conclude, and I look forward to more dialogue with my colleagues.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Rabi. So,
Well done, I think. Thank you. I think within my basically position, I'll share with you some of the things that may be more relevant to the audiences. I think the net zero journey or the net zero objective, I think, is easier said than done. I think when we say net zero, I think we mean that no longer we're going to use fossil fuel to run our cars. No longer we use fossil fuel to basically run our power. Mean we have to tackle some of the difficult industries as well, like heavy transport, like shipping, aviation, and these sectors. As well as circularity aspect as well. So I think another note from engineering point of view, I think even if we reach 100% renewable by 2050, even if we reach 100% electrification of vehicle, this is still not enough to basically reach net zero. There are another, I think, other sectors that we have to reach in all aspects. So to bring, I think, the topic more locally, I think we have tangible evidence that Emirates of Dubai has basically worked on energy management and energy strategy. So we already have a structural approach in terms of clean energy strategy 2050. And within this guiding principle, we have many sub-strategy, like carbon abatement strategy, like demand-side management strategy. We have green mobility strategies, and also we have integrated water strategy, which basically a challenging thing since we have heavy dependency on desalinated water to support our economy. That's why we have to be more sort of efficient in using water and looking at the whole aspect, or moving from fragmented approach of dealing with water into more sort of integrated water, looking at recycled water, looking at the groundwater, looking at the desalinated water as well as the storm water. Also, the green mobility as well is another pillar that we're looking at. We're looking to increase the penetration of electric vehicle in the Emirates, and looking at like 7 years back, we only had 500 green vehicle in the Emirates, like hybrid and electric. And today, I think we have more than 50,000, and this continues to grow based on the, I think, technology, based on the battery capacity. And as we speak today, we have more than 25 model in the market, where we used to have only maybe 2 model in the UAE market. Last thing also on the net zero, I think we have established as well circular economy strategy and committee as well to sort of between, I think, government and private sector to look at into the market creation for these missing element, which are not being addressed by the energy generation or by the electrification of vehicle. On top of all these strategies that we're having, I'm pleased also to say that we don't only launch the strategy, but we have an activation basically mechanism in terms of measuring and measuring and verifying how much we're saving on each program and each component, and we report what we save to the public every year to ensure that we are on target. And we have also government structures in terms of reporting to our top decision makers to sort of intervene in terms of policy making, to intervene in terms of we are behind in certain area. So with that, I'll stop and hear the question and answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Faisal. So anyway, I'd like to, probably open the floor to questions, but I'll just summarize very quickly. So Iris started with explaining the holistic approach of the U.S. government, the strategic climate change and energy security, and appreciating that there is an energy security risk ecosystem and it's very large. And talking to the partners of the U.S., people like NATO and the North Atlantic Council, talking about trying to address this very, very complex issue of the transition that may take years, and it's very, very right. It takes many, many years to do this, and we're trying to do this very, very quickly. And I think we might stumble. So as you said, it's not linear. It's challenging. It's difficult. It's going to be bumpy, and leveraging on the technology and innovation is going to be very, very critical. And you outlined the 4 areas, which is the planning, analysis using the simulations and the war games, as you put it, looking at fossil fuel consumption, looking at efficiency, given that you're, as you quoted, 75% of the largest user for global, and in terms of a footprint for the US, and your resilience, so the aftermath of natural disasters, which obviously the US and other places in the world are facing more and more year by year, and then taking the adaptation of technology. Then we had Dr. Ravi, who started with saying that he was overwhelmed by the partnership and the warm welcome of the UAE. We were more than welcome anytime, sir. I hope you've tried our cuisine as well, the lugaimat and all that really, really sweet things. And you spoke about a very important point that John Kerry had reached out and said, well, you cannot have global climate change without security and understanding security, and I like the way that you put it. The world worth obviously sort of protecting and securing. One of the largest users of fossil fuels, as you said, and I like this thing moving at the speed of climate threat rather than just the governments, which may be sometimes a little bit bureaucratic, and obviously moving in the right direction. So, and you spoke about aviation. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that's happening around SAFO. So, and you spoke about some of the great innovations like the blended wing aircraft, etc., which can bring in, and readying the Army or the Air Force to the hydrogen transition, and working also with private industry and trying to really commercialize or bring in these things, domesticate, for example, a lot of this technology, and so working on that, looking at innovative ways of developing, and looking at demand side management, flight planning, etc., and actually just being more and more aware. Well, it sounds like you're becoming more and more aware, making all your people really more aware of the impact that they have. And you spoke about some really interesting stuff like the microreactors and the geothermal stuff, and obviously the space solar thing that with the microwave technology, which sounds like something out of Star Trek, my friend. But
it sure does.
I can feel like you're taking this energy and it's beaming down every time you want to download a bit of energy, get some beam down, and then Faisal Rashid took us concluding, bringing the topic. I guess back down to earth and back to the local context, where he spoke about the approach of the structural approach really of the Dubai government, the UAE government towards the clean energy strategy. Spoke about the sort of the green mobility strategy, the integrated water strategy, which because we rely so much on desalinated water, and the Dubai Supreme Management strategy, and moving from a fragmented approach really towards an integrated approach, and gave an example of the growth in demand. Like in a matter of less than 5 years, we've gone from 500 EVs to 50,000 EVs. So I don't know what that kind of percentage growth that is. That's like 10,000%. So, and he spoke about the circular economy, which is something that they started looking at more recently. More importantly, actually bringing the public-private partnerships together. And then finally, he concluded by talking about the MRV, because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So, and I know the Dubai government. I've had the pleasure of sitting on some of these committees, and seeing the great work that has been done. But he spoke about the governance structure, which really feeds back on that. So, with that, I'd like to maybe open the floor to questions. Anybody have any reactions or any questions to any of our panelists this afternoon? Yes, please. So, and do you have a traveling mic? Do you have a traveling mic?
It's not an issue.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Yeah. How much energy are we talking about being down? The immediate question I have is the scalability of that.
That's a really great question. So what?
Well, I can repeat it also for the online audience.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just asking how much energy are we talking about when we're talking about beaming it down? Because immediately the questions I have are the scalability of these applications. And I've heard of this technology before, which is fantastic, but I want to know how you guys are envisioning the rollout of this.
But so before I answer you, let me just start with a quick analogy, and an aspirational analogy, by stating that there is no oak tree that does not first start from an acorn. So to fly, to test, to understand is where we're at right now. It's we're decades away from that, but we're going to start with a pizza box size, maybe a coffee table size cell to gather this, and then proof out the power beaming aspect of this, and we're starting to do that already. Not in the orbital environment, but we have to understand it in the orbital environment. My general sense is when you progressively move, you're going to have to move to a bus size panel, then you move to a football field size panel, and that's the scale we're talking about to become operationally effective, to be operationally relevant to the needs that are out there. But what needs power? We have things that need power that are all different sizes and all different scales. So how do you proof it? Well, you start small and then you move from there. So this technology, which is why I waited for it to talk about it last, is the one that's furthest out from us, but one that is aspirational enough and real enough to start doing it now.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the? I can also ask questions. Okay, so let me ask maybe pose a question to the panel. So we talk about this whole issue of net zero. What in your view do you think that people actually understand? The whole concept of a net zero world, and can we really get to that point without having a very clear offsetting policy to all industries, including the military sector? Is that really possible? Is it going to be a sort of a balancing game, or is it going to be that everybody has to actually do things? I'll give you an example. I asked this question in the maritime industry. If you look at the maritime industry, which I work in at the moment. If you look at our total global contribution to carbon, it's not even 3%. So but when you look at this tanker, I mean, when layman looks at a tanker and looks at a tanker full of oil, it would seem that there's smoke coming out of the chimney and stuff like that. We see that as a very there is a difference between what is the perceived risk, what is the real impact of risk. So do you think that not only obviously the military industry, but the non-militarized industry, do you think that can we achieve this net zero without really without really having a very strong offsetting policy? I mean, do you have a policy in the government on offsetting?
Yeah, so I can't speak for I don't want to speak for the whole U.S. government piece of the puzzle, but just speaking for the DoD and how we think about this. I mean, we've been well. One, I think just to talk about our scale, we're very huge, and we have it's very quite tricky to measure all of our footprint. We have a hard enough time auditing our budget to trying to measure our entire energy footprint is very hard. That being said, we're doing that. We recently released a congressionally mandated report on GHG emissions for the entire department, and that kind of lays out a broad picture of where we are currently on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in particular, just for folks' awareness. But again, that was congressionally mandated, and then the question is, what are we doing about it? And Ravi laid out some really great examples of the Air Force leaning aggressively into innovation, and we are, because that's where the opportunities are. How we can balance the need for mission readiness, which is kind of what our standard is. We have to be ready to go all the time. It is hard for us to take risk in the ability to go now. So we are watching very carefully markets and where we can try to take advantage of it. But thinking to the long-term future, I think we also have to be realistic in where energy is today and where technology is today. So these are some of the trade-offs we're talking about currently right now in the DoD, and in working with our allies and partners in particular. And I'll bring up NATO again because they're a force multiplier for us in a lot of ways, because they can bring together an alliance to talk about this in and around more countries. But what are the trends in liquid fuels? What are the trends for our aircraft? What are the trends in fuels for the maritime industry? What are the trends in fuels for not only tactical vehicles, but large tactical vehicles within the fleet? And trying to have a sense of alignment on what is likely to be the technology that we would all collectively leverage, and what's likely to be the technology that we're going to probably use for the future, whether it be liquid fuels for aircraft or otherwise. I think just having a sense of consensus on where the trends in the energy transition is going is going to help us plan long term, and that's really the journey that we're on right now.
One of the reasons I'm asking this question is that younger people who are really driving the needle and the movement, when they talk to me, they say. That, okay, we're doing all this stuff about, emission control, and we're trying to change our cars, and we're trying to do this, and we're trying to demand side money. But, we still have all these, these conflicts and these wars and stuff like that, and they have such a massive impact on. So why don't we have like sort of an offsetting kind of system in the military? So when we engage in wars, whoever gets engaged in the war has to pay, and then we can do a Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. I mean, I know this is the sort of a bit of out-of-the-box thinking, but it's not. It's sort of the thinking that younger people are sort of challenging, because maybe when we're a bit older, we sort of have lived with this world as we do things. But moving forward, I think there's greater demand from younger people saying, okay, the military. The expenditures on military is massive. The military industry is the number one in terms of size of sort of when we're talking about money and stuff like that. So they ask us, why should we not have them sort of offset? Even, I mean, during what you're describing is during peace times of trying to do innovation with whatever you're doing, but during war times as well. I mean, it would have a big impact, obviously, in terms of offsetting. But is that something that you think the world would be looking at? I mean, this is a sort of thinking outside the box.
No, I think it's really important, and it's quite frankly, it's really important for the long-term future of our military to think about these concepts, if not only from a recruitment standpoint at a minimum, but it's for the right thing to do. We do a lot of analysis on impact of operations, and on impact of disasters that happen in the aftermath of disasters, and how we can help an environment get back to where it was before. But I think it's pretty tricky, just to be candid, around offsets in particular. There's a huge elephant in the room, and it's Congress. Our ability to be creative in some of this is very dictated in some ways by our congressional mandates and what we're allowed to spend money on and what we're not allowed to spend money on. And so we have to be pretty diligent in thinking about how we advance mission readiness and how we advance warfighter advantage, as we say in DoD parlance. We're doing some pretty creative thinking around how we can use energy usage, energy efficiency usage, and bring it back into the system. So like in effect, an offset, and maybe Ravi, you can speak to some of the innovation that we're doing with our pilots to try to encourage efficiencies that are getting put back into the system. So it's an effective offset in a way. But I think I honestly, my candid opinion is that if there was an idea proposed about DoD and offsets, it would not meet approval from our congressional appropriators.
Thank you very much for that. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to add a little bit to it, to this, and you touched on a number of issues. One is the presence of war and how much it damages the environment. So as a former Air Force officer, I can say to you that nobody wants a war because we know the costs involved. The human costs, the environmental costs are too great. So we want to make sure that we deter and do that in a way that preserves a more secure and stable society. That's our goal. Now, when you talk about other offsets, we can do these things like the blended wing body, drag reduction. All those things are considered things that help the environment, that reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we produce. But they're also operationally relevant because the ability to reduce the amount you consume is related to the resources you need to be effective operationally. So we look at that closely, and you draw the conclusion very, very quickly that the more efficiency, the more sustainable you are, the more light and lean you're able to, and agile to conduct mission operations. So I would say that by merging those two and understanding them is better. I'll give you one example. We had one installation where the energy consumption came to a point where the installation commander encouraged everybody to reduce the amount of energy uses. They instituted several efficiency programs, and that saved enough dollars for them to purchase a microreactor out of their own funding because of the savings. We let them invest into that environment, and that type of thinking doesn't happen a lot. So we called up the installation, asked them, would we like to invest more? Would you like to do more? And they said yes. And would you like to use those funds on your own? They said no. We want to invest in more efficiency. We're addicted to clean energy. When do you ever hear that? And I think there's more people that ought to be saying that, and that's, to me, a result of how we're changing the view to include generationally how we're viewing clean energy, how we're fighting climate change, and we know that it's a global community that's going to do it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, I think that point is very important. And before I move on to ask Faisal about offsetting and the net zero, because it's really important. I mean, for us to get to meet some of these targets that many people are talking about, we can't do it really without offsetting, as you know, because it's going to take time. But on that question of the in investing in sort of clean energy. And as you said, we're becoming more and more addicted to clean energy because, everybody wants to talk about, using energy and clean energy and doing that. But one of the issues is that, and first you might want to comment on this, is that clean energy also at the moment, a lot of the clean energy projects, wherever they are coming from, wherever they are in the world, and a lot of it is coming with a lot of support, either by reducing taxation on these kind of projects or giving some incentives. So we're going back to subsidization model. Like we used to subsidize energy, conventional energy before, and we became addicted to that for many years. Now we're becoming addicted to this energy, and we're sort of subsidizing the clean energy. So the issue of subsidization, and what's the strategy, maybe Faisal, for actually weaning people off? I mean, is there a plan right now that we're going to get, governments are going to invest and sort of subsidize this energy, build the capacity, get to the point where the capacity is, but then slowly start removing the subsidies and then make it more rationalized in terms of use. Because if we overuse clean energy or we overuse conventional energy, we're overusing energy, we're wasting. And I know that there's been great work that you guys have done on the demand side management, regardless where that energy is coming from. We should conserve it regardless. If it was water coming out of a well or desalination it, we have to conserve it in the same way. So what do you think, what are the strategies for this in the future with Dubai Supreme Council?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's an excellent question. I think before talking about the subsidy and subsidization, I think from my experience in energy strategy, especially looking at what we have today and the climate agreement and so on, we looked at our strategy, our current strategy, which have guideline and they all have target as well to reach. And we have revisited, I think, these strategies and try to update them so we can tailor them to reaching our ultimate target by 2050. Maybe we might go like business as usual in terms of current strategy with a little bit of update. I think beyond 2030, I think we have to go a little bit more aggressive. I would say also from my experience that the next 5 years or the next 10 years it's very important to basically push for all this mature technology, which we already have, and we don't have excuse. I'm referring to the renewable energy generation, especially solar in our climate, because wind maybe is not viable at this point as we speak. I'm talking about the electrification of vehicle, especially for smaller vehicle, for sedans. So we should push for this type of thing in the next 5 or 10 years. And also decarbonization of existing building, which basically means lowering the intensity of the building via energy efficiency. Before getting into the solar rooftop, I think we should look at the insulation, look at the connecting this building to district cooling, connecting all, I think this is something we already have, which is all potable water reaching the end user basically are being recycled, going to the system, being treated, and then being used for multiple purposes, including parks, including green spaces, especially Dubai in the next, I think, 5 to 10 years. I think we're going to increase the green space. That means we need to have more water. We need to have efficient use of water, and so on. In terms of, I think, subsidy, I think we have already moved, accelerated on the transport with some soft incentive, which became, I think, irrelevant as we speak today. I think the market started to pick up based on the advantage, the economic advantage, without even putting any subsidy in this. Dubai government also, or Dubai Power Authority also have basically collaborated with the private sector for the last 3 or 4 projects in renewable energy. We're talking about huge capacity, maybe 4,000 megawatt capacity. So I think maybe no country in the MENA region has reached such capacity in such time without, I think with the approach that haven't basically connected to subsidy. So all these have to be financially, they have to make sense financially. So the Green Building Code, we have also upgraded it from by the Dubai Municipality from the Green Building Code to SAFAT, which means Energy Star Rating. So different rating starting from silver to gold to platinum. I think the Dubai Municipality is working on some sort of incentive because still we have to do a lot in the coming year, especially on building. As we speak today, also we have more than 10,000 buildings been retrofitted. But when we say retrofit, we have to ensure that we do deep retrofit. deep retrofit doesn't mean that we only tackle solar rooftop or lighting. We have to tackle everything, every sort of item within the building, including the building envelope.
On on the subsidy you have, on the subsidization, do you think that how long are we gonna continue having to sort of subsidize? Because Dubai is not trying to subsidize so much, because a lot of the alternative energy is being generated by the government entity DO anyway in Dubai. So
yeah, I think the subsidy has failed. Even I think like in Germany, they have they subsidized the solar rooftop and then they withdrew, and then the market got affected. So this hasn't been adopted in Dubai. Looking into as we speak today, we have around 600 megawatt from solar rooftop. I think the incentive, is basically the payback period, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. So just on the net zero, I want to ask about, is there enough solar installed capacity and planned solar capacity for us to generate enough green hydrogen in the future? Is that one of the plans?
Again, the green hydrogen, as I mentioned before, that it's not basically we cannot put anything in our strategy unless it reaches large scale. I think no country in the world has reached enough scale in hydrogen, whether it is in transport, whether it is in power generation. So we are continuing to do, as the Dubai government, continuing to do pilot and research and pushing for these pilot projects, but we cannot put it in the strategy unless it reaches maturity. We cannot say by 2030 we will have 5% hydrogen. We can only, maybe it becomes only relevant to the solar energy.
Yes, thanks. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I felt like I needed to say one more thing on this offset conversation, because I do think it's a really important part of the puzzle. And one of the things that we're doing is nature-based solutions, and we're really thinking heavily about how we use nature-based solutions to build resilience, whether it's rebuilding of oyster beds to protect our shorelines, or working on our forest management. But we're also thinking about how to use our lands for carbon abatement and for sequestration, and that's traditionally how some offsets get used, right? We're just doing it in a way that we're already using our existing infrastructure to do. So I don't know how you would keep tabs on that, quite frankly, but I think we're trying to do the right thing. And by thinking creatively about what we have at our disposal, and we have vast tranches of land that we can think about how to use effectively for sequestration. And then on the subsidies question, I think it's super important too, as we talk about the role of governments in this broad transition, and for the Department of Defense, we're making, as Ravi has said, I think you have to use government sometimes to make big bets where the commercial industry finds there to be risk. And that blended wing body aircraft is a classic example of where there's immense commercial application through the cargo sector, through the FedExes of the world, et cetera. But without the DoD sending the signal that we're gonna be all in on this, it would be hard to come together. And the same place for the DoD is we're looking to send the signal to industry about these kind of technologies that we're going to be investing in. We're a marketplace. We send the signal to industry, and it would be helpful if we say that this company and this technology and its renewable capacity is something that we're going to buy into, and that sends a signal that it can be used across the DoD. So I think we're trying to think about how we use our levers of government power to impact change and make the market conditions work so that we can eventually not have as much government influence, but there's a real role to play, I think, in these initial stages of an energy transition.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough, because obviously, as you said, I mean, the U.S. is very, very big and it's very complex, as you said. So there is no simple answer. I think you're gonna have to address it in so many different ways. I'm cautious of time. We've just run just under an hour. I'll be happy to take one, maybe maximum two questions, if any, really from the audience to any of our panelists. Any reactions, questions? Okay. Going once.
It looks like we've answered them all.
Going twice? Okay, sold. So I'd like to, on behalf of Trends and the Atlantic Council, really thank very much our three panelists this afternoon for giving us such great insights. And you'd agree with me that we went right up to outer space right down to the ground. It's been a pleasure moderating this session. Thank you very, very much to all our panelists, and also thank you very, very much for your attention to this. And over to you, Noor. Thank you.
Very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you again to the panelists for your valuable perspectives. I would like to now welcome Awad Al-Bareki, the head of Trends Global Sector, to deliver the conference recommendations. Welcome, Awad.
Allah يعطيك.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to summarize some of the key recommendations developed by our panelists and speakers over the course of 2 days intellectually engaging. Session 1, Political and Strategic Issues Challenging International Climate Action. Identify complementary areas of national interest and global effort concerning the mining and processing of critical minerals necessary to energy transition. Establish climate finance mechanism also at the national level to allow government to align general finance goals with climate finance. Sustain the momentum of breakthroughs achieved at COP28 by embedding climate targets in national policy and committing financial resources. Session 2, the effect of climate change on political conflict. Promote understanding of relationship between climate vulnerability and the potential for political conflict so that improved outcome can be achieved at local levels. Develop credible predictive system to identify the most at-risk geographies in terms of climate impact and countries needing assistance according to their risk profile. Formally include climate change in transboundary waters agreement as well as tailored local solution to better account for impact on local communities. Session 3, how climate change shapes the nature of security. Prioritize the investment in infrastructure that can withstand the impact of rising sea levels and other climate-related hazards in coastal regions. Fostering innovation in areas such as advanced monitoring system, early warnings, technologies, and sustainable military practices to enhance security capabilities. Build capacity to enhance resilience and preparedness at both national and international level in the area of climate science, security planning, and community level resilience, as well as education programs to raise awareness about the security implication of climate change. Session 4, Green Economy and the Future of Climate Financing. Establish new financial instruments to mobilize and direct private finance towards supporting the most pressing climate innovations and research and supporting the overall delivery of energy transition. Implement multilateral effort to facilitate trade in clean energy supply chains and joint measures to promote R&D and end-of-life recycling. Facilitate engagement to support resource-rich countries to play bigger roles in the middle and downstream of clean energy supply chain. Session 5, the energy transition and net zero. Modernize and update the receptive missions of service branches in favor of green innovation, reducing emissions, and tackling a greater stake in disaster responses associated with the changing climate. Increase and encourage partnership between the military and other entities, including other government, the private sectors, and local communities, to advance and capitalize of energy transition, particularly with regard to energy efficiency and low carbon technology. So with that, I would like to thank you, and now I'll hand it to Noor to close the remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Awad. Now I'd like to welcome Mr. Jonathan Panica for his closing remarks. Welcome, Mr. Jonathan.
Well, thank you very much, Excellencies, friends, and colleagues, those of you with us today in person and virtually from all over the world. We appreciate you joining us at COP28 for Trends Research and Advisory and the Atlantic Council's third annual conference on sustainable security, the soft and hard implications of climate. As Nora mentioned, I'm Jonathan Panikoff, the director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council. It's an honor to really be here and to have co-hosted this conference with Trends. The discussions we've had over the last 2 days reaffirm that we're living in an era of immense climate risks and climate challenges that have to be met with persistence, collaboration, and partnerships. We find it fitting that both COP27 last year at Sharm and now COP28 here in Dubai were hosted in the Middle East, given that the region is likely to be harder hit by climate change and its implications than any other in the world. Since 2000, on average, Middle East temperatures have risen by almost double that of the global increase. And given the region's initially hotter and drier climate, in parallel with dwindling water access and rising sea levels, this regional rise in temperature means that the average global temperature increase we've spent so much time fighting against, has already hit the Middle East. This region bears an outsized stake in the consequences of the climate crisis, and as a result, holds a larger claim to the solution leadership that's going to be required. As we talked about throughout our conference, the nexus between climate change and national security will be exacerbated by rising temperatures and by the extension of dwindling resources. These challenges require decisive and bold action. At the Atlantic Council, our motto is working to shape the global future together, which underscores our continued friendship and relationship with Trends that enabled us to bring together leading experts from climate-related disciplines, representatives of government, private institutions, to emphasize the cross-sectoral insights and perspectives that drive meaningful policy recommendations for policymakers across the globe. As we conclude this conference, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to our speakers and dignitaries for making this conference a huge success. Your constructive contributions and insights enrich the debate on how to deal with one of the most severe phenomena facing the security of humankind, a changing climate. Over the past 2 days, we've discussed 5 topics that Awad summarized and put forth what I think are incredibly impactful and meaningful recommendations for all of us to take forward to policymakers in our respective governments. There is no doubt the insights presented at the conference will not only reinforce our understanding of the problems and their various repercussions, but contribute to strengthening efforts aimed at elevating attention for sustainable security and to support international decision makers as they seek to address the threat of global warming. We hope that combining cross-sectoral and practical international perspectives, we can inspire new ways of thinking about collective climate security and encourage policymakers in all regions to continue working together to secure a peaceful and prosperous future, because there's simply no other way. So on behalf of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative and the entire Atlantic Council family, I'd like to thank all of you who joined us over the last 2 days. I'd like to thank Trends Advisory and Research for their continued partnership in hosting this year's conference and helping to bring together so many prominent thinkers from around the globe. Let me turn it back to Noor one more time. Thank you all very much.
Distinguished guests and participants, we have now come to the end of our 2 days of intensive discussions. I would like to start by thanking you all. On behalf of the Trends Research and Advisory team, we'd like to thank Dr. Mohammed Ali, our CEO, and Mr. William Wexler for their warm welcome. Dr. Adnan Shahabuddin for his keynote speech and whose friendship we are grateful for, the panelists for their thought-provoking talks, and the moderators for organizing their sessions impeccably. Finally, I want to thank the audience, both here in person at COP28 and virtually around the world. We look forward to the positive impact that will ripple from this conference into the wider world. Until we meet again, let's continue to work towards a future defined by sustainability, security, and shared prosperity. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
السلام عليكم. طبعا حبيت أشكر أتلانتيك كونسل جوناثان اند ويليام، وأشكر المتحدثين سعادة عدنان شهاب الدين، وأيضا المودريترز، وأشكر فريق العمل من أتلانتيك كونسل وفريق العمل من ترندز على هذا التجمع الجميل للسنة الثالثة على التوالي. نحن وأتلانتيك كونسل طبعا نجتمع على تنظيم مؤتمر قوي جدا، وهو نتاج الشراكة بين أتلانتيك كونسل وأيضا بين ترندز. طبعا ولله الحمد كل سنة نحن نتميز معهم في تنظيم فعالية، فشكرا جزيلا لأتلانتيك كونسل، شكرا لفريق العمل في أتلانتيك كونسل، شكرا لفريق العمل في ترندز، وشكرا لفريق العمل أو شكرا للمنظمين لهذا الحدث طبعا. ونلتقي إن شاء الله السنة القادمة في فعالية جديدة وموضوع جديد، وأيضا في خلينا نقول يعني في قضية تهم الشرق الأوسط إن شاء الله. شكرا للجميع.